safely out of Turkey and en route to the United States at a very minimum. But he could have discussions on some of these other matters, including John Roberts reporting about potential written questions and answers from the special prosecutor Robert Mueller, recovery from the devastating and world-altering for people in the Panhandle hurricane that they're still just beginning to clean up from. So the president with an escort heading over to Air Force One, and we're watching this just to see if he has anything to say, because if he does, we don't want you to miss it. Sometimes the president makes real news on these walks from one transportation system to another, but it looks to me like he's probably not going to make any right now, as John Roberts understandably predicted. So the trip off to Ohio for the rally that will take place later today, and as always, we'll stream that on our website, as we always do. And the president going up the gangplank, and that's it. So more now on the news out of the White House that President Trump's lawyers have not yet reached a firm deal with the special counsel Robert Mueller's team to submit written answers to questions on Russian meddling and possible collusion. That's what sources familiar with the negotiations are telling our chief White House correspondent, John Roberts. Alex Little joins us now. He's a criminal defense attorney, also a former assistant U.S. attorney and prosecutor. Alex, thank you.
Good afternoon.
What your initial thoughts on these new developments, such as they are?
Well, I think these negotiations have been going on, as John said, for almost a year. And as that's happened, the investigation has continued, and I'm sure the special counsel knows a lot more about what they want to ask the president. But the real question is, if there's going to be an interview, if there's going to be a question and answer session, how does that happen? The idea the president's lawyers have pushed of doing written questions would be very beneficial to President Trump. And if Mueller's team accepts it, it could be in a number of things. And one of those could be that they don't want to push this issue in court. They'd have to go get a subpoena. They'd have to fight about that in court in D.C. And it could be an incredibly important constitutional case, but they may not want to do that. And so if you see the special counsel moving towards acceptance of written questions, it may suggest they don't want a court fight.
And you have said that that's good news for the president. Explain how.
Well, it is. Anytime you have a witness, and the president's clearly at least a witness in this investigation, who's going to have to answer questions under oath, if you have written questions, you can work with your lawyers on those, you can form those, make sure the answer is as accurate as possible, make sure you stay away from any sort of tripwires that might suggest that they're getting a different issue than you're actually addressing. And so you have the protection of your lawyers. When you're orally answering a question with an investigator or a lawyer like Robert Mueller and his team, there are plenty of ways that you can mess that up. And we know the president, when he speaks extemporaneously, is not necessarily the best with his facts. And so this is going to protect him if he's able to do it by written answers.
And is it your sense that this is something that's probably going to happen?
You know, it's really hard to say. The fact that we're still now months and months on without an agreement suggests that there will never be a meeting in the minds, and that ultimately the special counsel's going to have to decide whether or not he wants to issue the president a subpoena, which is an incredibly severe act in this investigation if it were to happen. You know, I think one thing that's really hurt the president, though, is as this investigation has gone on, it's no doubt the special counsel knows a lot more. Just a few weeks ago, the president's campaign chairman has agreed to cooperate with the investigation. He's going to tell them a lot about what he knows. And so the questions that the special counsel would have today, I think, are going to be a lot more pointed. They're going to be backed up by a lot more information. The president's going to have a hard time, if there is something he's trying to hide or is concerned about, being able to do that. Time does not help the president in this investigation.
Alex Little with us from Nashville. Alex, thank you.
Thank you.
Ahead, Turkish officials reportedly now have evidence, clear and concrete, that the Saudis tortured and murdered a Washington Post columnist. The Saudi Arabian monarchy. The accusations stirring up some real trouble in D.C. as some lawmakers are now pushing the White House to punish the Saudis. We'll take you to the Capitol and live to Turkey next. And officials there say they now have proof that somebody murdered him at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. That's according to the reporting of the Wall Street Journal. The Journal's parent company and Fox News' parent company share common ownership. The Journal is reporting that Turkish officials have audio and video recordings, extremely graphic ones, we're told, that make it clear that Jamal Khashoggi is dead, and that they shared those recordings with the United States. In other words, U.S. intel now has the information. The Saudi columnist has been a critic of his own Saudi government. Saudi Arabia and U.S. are, of course, allies, despite it all, and they've been particularly close during the Trump administration. Saudi officials have denied any involvement in the columnist's disappearance, but it seems the facts are flying against that statement. Benjamin Hall is live in Izmir, Turkey, which is about 200 miles south and west of Istanbul, where the missing columnist was last seen alive. Ben?
Yeah, hi, Shep. And all reports do suggest that these tapes and audio tapes are incredibly graphic. And apparently, if true, they leave no doubt whatsoever that Khashoggi was killed inside the Saudi consulate and that he was killed in a graphic manner. Now, Turkey has refused to release the tapes yet because they say they don't want to give away their surveillance programs, but they have apparently shared them with U.S. intelligence. And just imagine if they do have detailed recordings from inside the Saudi consulate. It does suggest that for some time now they've had that consulate under total surveillance. And remember, the two countries, Saudi Arabia and Turkey, are major regional rivals. Both countries have been pointing the finger at one another. Turkey, of course, blaming Saudi Arabia for the death of Jamal Khashoggi, while Saudi Arabia saying Turkey is merely trying to drive a wedge between them and the U.S. But the two countries have at least agreed just yesterday to set up a joint investigation unit, and already Saudi investigators have headed to Turkey. Whether or not they can even work together is one question. Whether or not they reach a resolution in this is another. Shep?
Hey, tell us more about what this could mean for U.S. relations with Saudi Arabia.
You know, Shep, we heard President Trump saying that he was not considering stopping the arms sales. $110 billion in arms sales between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. And that, he said, was A, because that's thousands of American jobs, but B, because Russia and China would just suck up all of that, all of those weapons transfers. But there has been a pushback on the Senate Hill, and in fact we've heard from a number of senators from both sides of the aisle, including Senator Murphy and Senator Rand Paul, who have both said they would be willing to force a vote through to push back against these arms sales. And that would be a major issue for U.S.-Saudi relations. Arms sales between the countries have been a bedrock of the relationship, as have oil and intelligence sharing in the battle against terror. But those arms sales really would be a key issue here. And so if anything like that were to happen, we would see the relationship between the two countries change drastically, and in turn, perhaps America's ability to influence various issues also changing. So the way we're seeing this going suggests it could become a much wider geopolitical conflict. That is, of course, if all these Turkish allegations are true. Shep?
Benjamin Hall, live Izmir in Turkey. Ben, thanks very much. He mentioned the backlash from lawmakers from Washington's arms deals with the Saudis. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel with more on that part of the story. He's live on the Hill. Hi, Mike.
Chef, good afternoon. Bipartisan lawmakers are saying if it's true the Saudi regime murdered this Washington Post journalist, there would be severe consequences in terms of the relationship between the United States and the Saudi kingdom. The Senate Foreign Relations chairman is warning there would be severe repercussions.
As they are telling us these incredulous things, all they're doing is again, undermining their relationship. But if they kill this journalist, the relationship will be severely altered and will change much of the dynamic, candidly, as to how we went about things in the Middle East.
28 House Democrats sent a letter today to the Saudi ambassador demanding cooperation, writing, quote, "Journalists around the world must be allowed to conduct their jobs without fear of retaliation. With this in mind, we are requesting the full cooperation of the Saudi government into an independent investigation of Mr. Khashoggi's whereabouts." And a senior Senate Democrat says this is no time to be polite with the Saudis.
Murder is murder, and I don't care who may get upset with doing that. You repress the people. That one play more than any religious group. That it plays into the hands of extreme religious groups. Murder is murder.
And already some leading lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are talking about the possible need to punish the Saudi regime. Shep?
Mike, some lawmakers say that the president should get tough on Saudi Arabia right now.
No question about it. We've heard from some leading Democrats saying that if the U.S. does not get tough, it will signal to this regime and to others that this type of behavior is acceptable.
The message that this sends, a U.S. ally killing a U.S. resident journalist overseas, unfortunately sends the wrong message to all sorts of other regimes around the world that may be thinking of trying to silence journalists who are giving them a hard time.
Some leading Republicans say they want to know exactly what happened and then get to the bottom of it.
This administration's taking it seriously. This is a fresh deal. We start with a blank sheet of paper, and I think they've been able to reconstruct a lot. But we're not there to where we know the full picture, and until that happens, it would be premature for us to make any decisions.
It is clear the Senate Intelligence Chairman, Richard Burr, does not want to jump the gun, but a lot of lawmakers are demanding answers from the Saudis in a hurry. Shep?
Mike Emanuel on Capitol Hill. Michael, thank you. FBI officials have pulled employees stationed in and around a half a dozen Asian cities after claims that they partied with prostitutes. And now the Justice Department's Inspector General is investigating. That's according to a report by our corporate cousins at the Wall Street Journal. Fox News has since confirmed that the DOJ watchdog is investigating FBI employee misconduct. We don't know the specific accusations just yet, but there is concern that foreign intelligence agencies could compromise U.S. agents through prostitution, which is legal in some parts of Asia. The FBI gave a statement which reads, in part, all FBI employees are held to the highest standards of conduct, and allegations against any employee are taken very seriously. Upon learning of these allegations of misconduct, action was taken to reassign certain personnel to non-operational roles while the allegations are reviewed. Let's turn to Wall Street Journal reporter Aruna Vishwanathan. She's a reporter there and covered the Justice Department. The White House, she wrote this article. Hey, nice to see you, Aruna. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
What do we know about specifics of the accusations?
So at this point, we don't know a ton. We know that people were called back from 5 or 6 cities across East Asia, Southeast Asia, and this is conduct that was happening over the course of some time. But I don't have a clear sense, and we don't have a clear sense publicly yet, of if the allegations centered around conduct in one city where they all went to, or if it was conduct that was happening across these cities. We don't really have a sense of that at this point.
Do we have an idea about how the information about this got to the higher-ups?
I don't have a sense of that yet. It was flagged, and headquarters immediately pulled them back and referred it to the Inspector General, and all of that, I think, happened pretty quickly once they heard about it. And so we'll probably find out more in the coming months as the Inspector General conducts his review, but at this point, what we have is pretty limited.
Do you know the scope of the investigation or the number of people who were accused or anything like that?
I know that there were around 5 or 6 people that were pulled back, and so the allegations are at least involve them, if not more people than just that. And just the fact that they're bringing back 5 or 6 people from 5 or 6 different cities seems somewhat significant. It's not sort of one embassy, a couple of people at one embassy doing something. So it's something that could potentially be pretty significant, but at this point, we don't have many details. There have been similar
Issues, if you will, with other agencies of the federal government in recent years.
Yes, that's right. Secret Service, the DEA have dealt with similar issues in the past. With Secret Service, I think it was, that you've got a lot of agents that are sort of constantly traveling overseas ahead of the president, getting set up in foreign locations in a high-stress environment, and DEA, too, is sort of overseas a lot. We haven't seen it as much with the FBI. They have somewhat more limited pools of people overseas. They have a few people stationed at a lot of different embassies, but yeah, we haven't seen the same exact type of issues this publicly at the FBI in recent years.
It'll take a while to get through this one. Aruna Vishwanathan, who from the Wall Street Journal, live in our Washington bureau. Thanks, Aruna. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Officials at Tyndall Air Force Base have just given an update on the situation there after Hurricane Michael caused this massive destruction. The headline from the news conference, which just ended, is mind-numbing and almost hard to believe. But it's true, and it's coming up. In the last hour, who say that Tyndall Air Force Base suffered widespread, catastrophic damage after taking a direct hit from Hurricane Michael. The storm damaged at least 3 F-22 stealth fighter jets when it ripped through Tyndall Air Force Base. Each jet costs around $150 million. The Pentagon released this new video showing the extent of the devastation. Think of it. 3,600 people live on this base. It's on 15 square miles, and there's not a single structure on the entire base that's livable. It's the largest training base for F-22 fighter pilots in all the country.
Help a lot of people.
Mike Tobin is live in Callaway, Florida, an eastern suburb of Panama City, really very close to Panama City, and just a couple of miles from Tyndall Air Force Base. Mike?
$1 million. You go a long way.
And unfortunately, Shepard, we heard from Colonel Brian Laidlaw, the commander of the 325th Fighter Wing, that word catastrophic applies to the flight line as well as the structures at the Air Force Base. Now, Tyndall Air Force Base is home to the F-22 Joint Strike Fighter, a fifth-generation fighter, as you mentioned, with a hefty price tag, more specifically $143 million per plane. Now, because they're fast-moving airplanes, they can get most of them out ahead of the storm. But just as the normal cycle goes, some of those aircraft are going to be down for maintenance. And we know now that there was extensive damage to all of the hangars on the base. And what we're hearing from the commander of the 325th, the commander of the 325th wing out there, they haven't been able to get the engineers in to do extensive assessment of the damage to the flight line. But we know that the damage is, in fact, extensive, Shep.
Callaway is a town that we were talking about as the storm came through, because we were watching the walls, the eye walls of the hurricane, and the western eye wall went right over Callaway, and we were wondering right then, how bad was it?
You know, Shepard, nothing is untouched. I'm standing at an RV and boat storage facility now, and as I look around, I see maybe one boat that may be able to be salvaged. Everything else out here is trashed. Everyone who lives out here has been touched by it. We saw the local hardware and feed store. They don't have any power, but they opened up to do shop in the parking lot there with a simple hand calculator, and that's because everyone out here needs tarps. They need bottled water. They need power generators. That stuff is coming in by the truckload, and the local hardware and feed store is delivering to the people who need it.
Our house is in worse shape than it is, so we're going to the house with this stuff. That needs the tarps.
What are you going to do?
Survive like everybody else. We're going to keep on going.
And beyond that, what we're seeing out here, Shepard, rows and rows of power trucks coming up 75, coming up 98. What we saw yesterday with the power trucks is that they were burdened with clearing the debris out of the way before they got to work on the power lines. Well, Governor Scott has changed that. He has established what he called push teams through the Department of Transportation. They are advancing the power crews, getting the debris out of the way, letting the power crews do what they do, reestablish power, and that seems to be streamlining their effort, or at least that's the hope that'll speed them up. Shep.
Mike Tobin in Callaway, right outside Panama City in Bay County. Mike, thank you. Well, the markets did a turnaround today. Did you see? Bouncing back a bit after 2 straight big days of losses. On Wednesday, the Dow dropped more than 800. Yesterday, it closed down more than 500. But even if stocks end in the green, it likely will not be enough to stop Wall Street from having the worst week in nearly 7 months. But it looks good right now. Well, up almost 300 points on the day out. You got to take the positive. We're having a positive day.
It is a positive day, but just let me explain something about this, okay? You look at this 291 points. We're closing in on 300 as we come into the final minutes of the trading day. You think, wow, 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 but guess what? Not a lot of volume here. The conviction is low. Volume was very high on Wednesday and Thursday. So we'll see what we see next week. But let's put this week into perspective for just a second. So this is not a correction. A correction is a pullback of 10%. It's not a bear market pullback of 20%. This is simply a pullback that we've had this week. So don't get so upset about everything going on. It's only a pullback. And guess what?
Don't look at your 401k.
Do you know how often we have a pullback in the markets?
How often?
Every 9 months.
Oh, on average.
All the darn time. We've had 56 since World War II. They happen a lot, and they recover in 4 months on average. So I got these numbers because I wanted to explain to folks that it's not the end of the trading world.
Context and perspective.
That's right.
Very good.
We do it all.
We're expecting some big earning announcements, I guess, next week, right?
Yeah, we got bank stocks today, right? That was big, although they didn't really. They had good results, but it didn't really show up. The big number to watch here, S&P 500 companies will see a 21% increase in earnings for the quarter. red hot, red spanking hot. But do you know what these guys are going to be watching for? Not the numbers necessarily, but what they say about what's coming next. Are they saying we're worried about tariffs? Are they saying we're worried about interest rates? They're going to be looking for all that perspective in those earnings announcements and the conference calls. Listen, people are looking forward. Is this the end of this fabulous cycle we've been in? That's the kind of questions they'll be asking.
Bond yields are up. You can make money off a little money now.
Yeah, which is nice, right? Because
especially if you're on a fixed income and you need to earn a little bit on your money.
Earn a little bit on your money and play a little bit in stocks, and that's they call it a barbell strategy.
All right.
I'm technical analysis today.
Have a great weekend, my friend. Thank you. One of Pope's allies has resigned after facing accusations of covering up sex abuse in the church. Why Pope Francis praised the cardinal today and suggests that he's just a fall guy. A cardinal caught in the middle of a sex abuse scandal and accused of cover-ups in the Catholic Church has stepped down. Pope Francis accepted Cardinal Donald Wuerl's resignation today and announced the cardinal made mistakes handling sex abuse in the church, made mistakes. But Pope Francis also praised his longtime ally, suggesting he was but a scapegoat. Laura Ingalls here. Do we hear from the Cardinal today?
We did indeed. There was a statement that was issued a short time ago. Cardinal Wuerl says he's deeply touched by the Pope's gracious words of understanding. That's how he puts it. Wuerl's statement regarding his resignation reads in part this: the Holy Father's decision to provide new leadership to the Archdiocese can allow all of the faithful, clergy, religious, and lay to focus on healing and the future. It permits this local church to move forward. And once again, for any past errors in judgment, I apologize and ask for pardon. My resignation is one way to express my great and abiding love for you, the people of the Church of Washington. And many Catholics who have been deeply angered over the sex abuse scandals have been eager to see a significant step like this. But with Pope Francis saying today he feels Wuerl served the Church well, some say it's more confusing than comforting. While Cardinal Wuerl has never been accused of inappropriate conduct himself, a Pennsylvania grand jury report released in August mentions his name more than 200 times for his poor handling of sexual abuse claims against priests while he was the bishop in Pittsburgh from 1988 to 2006. Wuerl's resignation is the most prominent and direct consequence following the Pennsylvania grand jury report to date. In a letter to Wuerl, the Pope said this today: you have sufficient elements to justify your actions and distinguish between what it means to cover up crimes or not to deal with problems and to commit some mistakes. However, your nobility has led you to not choose this way of defense. Of this, I am proud and thank you. Jeff?
1,000 kids, 1,000 people are molested, and he wants to move on?
He wants to move on and also offered him a job to stay in position until...
Not how things work in the real world.
Well, that's what's happening today.
Yeah. Top of the hour headlines moments away.